The Cape Verde Island archipelago was first colonized by Portuguese sailors, and the islands were barren of people but not of vegetation. The King of Portugal's brother was granted control over the entire island chain, and the Portuguese established present-day Cidade Velha in 1462 and was the first European settlement in the tropics. Portuguese, Genoese, and Flemish adventurers were the first ones to settle. In Spain, the Reconquista was growing in its mission to conquer Iberia and expel the Muslims and Jews. In 1492, the Spanish Inquisition also emerged in its fullest expression of anti-Semitism. It spread to neighboring Portugal, where the king exiled thousands of Jews to Sao Tome and Principe and Cape Verde in 1496. The Portuguese soon brought slaves from the West African coast, positioned on trade routes between Africa, Europe, and the New World. The archipelago prospered from the transatlantic slave trade during the 16th century. Santiago and Fogo hosted slave plantations growing sugar and cotton for shipment to Portugal, and producing cotton cloth for export to West Africa. Massive amounts of salt were produced on some other islands that were sold to cod fishermen. Horses were reared on Santiago Island and shipped to the African coast as well. More settlements sparked from this on the islands. Cape Verdean society at this period was deeply segregated and hierarchical. At the top were the peninsula-born Portuguese whites, mostly government officials, soldiers, and upper clergy. The next group were the local whites, with the earliest settlers and their descendants. The blacks came next, and the slaves were at the bottom. The island's prosperity encouraged sacking by pirates, particularly during the period of the Iberian Union, when Spain's enemies, the British, French, and Dutch, raided Portuguese colonies. Sir Francis Drake sacked Ribeira Grande in 1582, captured the island in 1585, and raided another island, Praia and São Domingos. During the 17th century, Algerian corsairs established a base on the Cape Verdean Islands. They raided Madeira in 1617, stealing the church bells and taking 1,200 people prisoner. Given the scarcity of capital for the region's development, the Portuguese Finance and Overseas Councils authorized the 1664 foundation of the Guinea Coast Company. The company aimed at the slave trade, ending individual tendency and encouraging slave companies. The Company of Quichot and Rivers and Commerce of Guinea, which operated between 1676 and 1682, was succeeded by the Company of Quichot and Cape Verde in 1690. The latter decades of the 17th century also saw the first immigration flows from the islands to North America. Whales abounded in the waters around Cape Verde, and whaling ships from Massachusetts and Rhode Island recruited local crewmen who knew the currents and weather from the islands of Brava and Fogo. These outflows, would continue for centuries. As a result of the 1712 French Castard expedition, in which Ribeira Grande was destroyed, the capital was partially moved to Praia, the modern capital. With the Portuguese increasingly sidelined in Atlantic trade, Cape Verde became a poor backwater. By 1740, the island was a supply point for American slave ships and whalers. This began a stream of male immigration to the American colonies. Praia, with its natural harbor, became the permanent capital in 1770 as a plantation economy diminished in importance relative to trade and naval supply. In 1747, the islands were hit with the first of several droughts and famines which have plagued them ever since at average 5-year intervals. The situation was made worse by deforestation and overgrazing, which destroyed the ground vegetation that provided moisture. 3 major droughts during the 18th and 19th centuries resulted in well over 100,000 people starving to death. The Portuguese government sent little relief during the droughts. Another famine affecting Brava and Fogo began in 1774. 20,000 people starved. Fogo's population dropped from 5,700 to 4,200 around 1777. The company's mismanagement made the situation worse as it sold desperately needed food and raised the prices of what little was available. In 1778, the monopoly ended and the Portuguese created the province of Cape Verde at Guinea. Mindelo was founded in 1795, Pedra de Lumion Sol in 1799, and Santa Maria in early 1830 on the same island. Praia was modernized in 1822, expanding northward. The British established a station in Mindelo to refuel ships with coal, water, and other supplies. Beginning in 1839, and the city flourished. 2 attempts to move the colonial capital from Praia were made. A plan to move to Picos in 1831, when another famine struck Cape Verde, and Mindelo was proposed in 1838. Many people did not want to move the colonial capital and it remained in Praia. 2 submarine telegraph cables were linked in 1874 to Pernambuco, Brazil, and to Cameroon via Bathurst in the Gambia in 1885. The system of morgados was abolished in 1863 and slavery in 1864, but much of the population remained dependent on their former masters, renting or sharecropping land. The decline of the slave trade dealt a blow to Cape Verde's economy. The shipping traffic at Mindelo, however, served as an important engine of economic activity. Ships plying the South Atlantic to and from Africa and Asia stopped at Mindelo for coal, salt, meat, water, and wine imported from Madeira and the Azores. In 1890, a total of 156 ships unloaded over 650 million metric tons of coal there, and the port was visited by over 2,200 ships carrying 344,000 people. Throughout much of the 20th century, the colonial government organized forced immigration to supply contract laborers for Portugal's tropical colonies. Between 1900 and 1970, particularly during periods of famine, and people were desperate, some 80,000 Cabo Verdeans were shipped to the plantations of Sao Tome and Principe, and more than 7,000 to Angola and Mozambique. Mindelo became the most used transatlantic telegraph station in 1912. A total of 669 ships were refilled each year at the port, reaching almost 2,000 a decade later. When gasoline began to be used as fuel, however, Mindelo could not rival the improved port facilities of Las Palmas on Gran Canaria or nearby Dakar in Senegal. The Suez Canal had also rerouted much of the maritime traffic out of the South Atlantic. The use of coal declined, leading to a coal strike in 1912 due to insufficient work. When the Great Depression began in 1930, ship activity fully ended. 2 of Cabo Verde's worst ever famines occurred in the 1940s, killing an estimated 45,000 people. The massive disaster was not reported in the Portuguese press, and no food aid was sent, due to World War II. Half the population of Fogo perished. Portuguese authorities forbade reporting on the deaths or even the use of the word famine. In 1952, the Portuguese government planned to transfer over 10,000 settlers to the island of Sao Tome and Principe to work on plantations. Africans came primarily from the islands of São Nicolau, Santiago, Santo Antão, Fogo, and Brava. When the 2 colonies became independent, many people left for Europe and the United States, and few returned to Cape Verde. Several famines occurred at this time due to poor harvests, the Second World War, and a poor response from the Portuguese colonial administration. Until and during the Portuguese colonial war, those planning and fighting in the armed conflict in Portuguese Guinea often linked the liberation of Guinea-Bissau to liberation of Cape Verde. In 1956, people formed the African Party for their independence of Guinea and Cape Verde. Although Cape Verde was neglected by Portugal, Portuguese treatment of Cape Verdeans was differed from the treatment of other colonized people. The people of Cape Verde fared slightly better than Africans in other Portuguese colonies because of their lighter skin. A small minority received an education, and Cape Verde was the first African Portuguese colony to have an institution of higher education. By the time of independence, 1/4 of the population could read, compared to 5% in Guinea-Bissau. Literate Cape Verdeans became aware of the pressures for independence which were building on the mainland. The islands continued experiencing droughts, famines, epidemics, and volcanic eruptions amid Portuguese government indifference. Thousands of people died of starvation during the first half of the 20th century, although the nationalist movement appeared less fervent in Cape Verde than in Portugal's other African holdings. The African Party for Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde was founded in 1956 by Amilcar Cabral and other Pan-Africanists. Many Cape Verdeans fought for independence in Guinea-Bissau. In 1926, Portugal had become a rightist dictatorship, which regarded the colonies as an economic frontier to be developed in the interest of Portugal and the Portuguese. Famines, unemployment, poverty, and the failure of the Portuguese government to address those issues caused resentment, but Portuguese dictator did not want to give up his colonies as easily as other European colonial powers had given up theirs. After World War II, Portugal was intent on holding on to its former colonies. When most former African colonies gained independence between 1957 and 1964, the Portuguese still held on. After the massacre, however, the people of Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau fought one of the longest African liberation wars. Like other colonies, autonomy was granted in 1972, and Portuguese Cape Verde held only parliamentary elections in 1973, in which only Portuguese citizens can vote. Only 25,000 people registered to vote out of the total population of 272,000, and a total of 21,000 people voted. The Portuguese constitution banned political parties at the time, and most of the candidates were put forward by the ruling People's National Action Movement. Some civic associations, however, were allowed to nominate candidates. The colonial history of Cape Verde ended when Cape Verde became independent, a negotiated transfer and one of the few Portuguese African colonies to achieve independence without guerrilla fighting within its borders. After independence, democracy was being chased, and Cape Verde is, as of 2024, the third African country free of malaria. That is it for the history of Cape or Cabo Verde.